So we have to prepare for a more angry world.
The Prime Minister of Sri Lanka, Mahinda Rajapaksa, resigned a couple of days ago amid a political and economic crisis, sending a letter of resignation to his brother, Gotabaya Rajapaksa, the president of the country. The political crisis in Sri Lanka came on the heels of the worst economic crisis since Sri Lanka's independence in 1948. People are saying it's caused by a shortage of foreign exchange that arose due to the restriction of tourist flow amid the coronavirus pandemic, and due to that, the country couldn't buy enough fuel. My dear friends, you must have seen the terrible pictures and videos coming out of Sri Lanka. There's an acute shortage of food and basic necessities. There's literally no fuel and gas in the country. Many parts of Sri Lanka are facing constant power outages due to lack of foreign exchange. And due to the lack of foreign exchange, they can't import fuel. And then there's a lot of commentators out there who are blaming China, especially WION. If you've seen the lethal reports by Palki Sharma, you'd think it's all about China, but is it really? Western and Indian experts say Sri Lanka's economic relationship with China is the main cause of the crisis. The United States calls this phenomena debt trap diplomacy. So what is debt trap diplomacy? Well, a creditor country provides funds to a borrower to secure its political advantage. If the borrower can't repay the money, he becomes dependent on the mercy of the lender. However, the Chinese loans only account for about 10% of Sri Lanka's total debt. Most of the debt, 30%, is due to international sovereign bonds. Defaults on Chinese infrastructure loans, in particular for the construction of the port of Hambantota, are considered factors exacerbating the crisis in Sri Lanka, but it's not really. The creation of the port Hambantota was actually financed by China Exim Bank. The port suffered losses, therefore Sri Lanka leased it for 99 years to the Chinese Merchants Group, which paid the island nation $1.12 billion. Therefore, the port of Hambantota couldn't have provoked a balance of payments crisis. In fact, thanks to the Chinese, Sri Lanka's foreign exchange reserves increased by $1.12 billion. Sri Lanka has constantly experienced balance of payment crisis. From 1965 to present day, the state has received 16 loans from the International Monetary Fund. Each was subject to conditions, of course. One of which was to reduce the budget deficit, maintain a tight monetary policy, reduce government food subsidies for Sri Lankans, and depreciate the currency to make exports more profitable. However, during periods of economic downturns, sound monetary policy suggests that governments should spend more on stimulating the economy, which was not possible on the terms of the IMF loan that was given to Sri Lanka. Nevertheless, the IMF loans continued to flow in, and the struggling economy continued to accumulate debt. The last IMF loan provided to Sri Lanka was back in 2016. The country received $1.5 billion for 3 years until 2019. The conditions were the same, and the economic situation deteriorated considerably during the prescribed period. Growth, investments, savings and incomes fell, and the debt burden increased. The situation was exacerbated by two economic shocks back in 2019. The first of these was provoked by a series of terrorist attacks on churches back in April, as well as the attacks on expensive hotels in Colombo. The attacks led to a significant drop in tourist traffic, with the number of tourists reportedly falling by 80% and a serious reduction in foreign exchange reserves. So what's going to happen now? Most likely, to cope with the current crisis, Sri Lanka will receive the 17th loan from the IMF, which will once again be granted under certain conditions. The loan will be followed by a deflationary monetary policy that will limit the prospects for economic recovery and exacerbate the problems of the citizens of Sri Lanka. So folks, who's going to win? Not the people of Sri Lanka, but the United States, who's the largest shareholder at the IMF. The United States has its own seat on the executive board. The executive board of the IMF can approve loans, policy decisions, and many other matters by a simple majority vote. Sri Lankans need to start making wise decisions and not borrow from the IMF. Keep an eye on the president.
It's heading towards IMF program number 17, is this going to be its last?
Most likely not. In these cases, repeated IMF programs are a signal that the country's policies don't stay on course for long periods of time. And in this case, the starting situation is quite complicated. So there is a fair chance that over the next few years, even if things start improving, IMF support will not be a short affair.